Ah, yes, indeed, the tea. You must have a cup of tea.
Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to the channel if this is your first time. So, it's 8:30 in the morning. I'm unusually awake for this time of the morning. So I thought I'd try and tackle a difficult subject for me, patriotism. Okay, so the way I'm doing this, I'm looking at 3 books, 2 that I have in my hand and another one that I'm going to be reading later, which doesn't necessarily have nationalism or patriotism in the title, but it's something that kind of relates to the way that certainly this first book refers to patriotism. So anyway, I'll get to the point. So for People April, I read this book, Billy Bragg's The Progressive Patriot. I read it for a specific reason, a search for belonging. The idea that what Billy Bragg tries to do in this book is to realign a concept of patriotism with his own sense of English and British history and his own sense of the justification and celebration of multiculturalism that you would find in Britain as well, but also the history of dissent as well, and the history of consent as well in politics, which I think is interesting. It's a very interesting, fascinating book that I would recommend, and it's mostly a history book. I'll get to talking about that book in a minute, but I just want to just describe what this little mini project is. So I'm going to talk about the book primarily in this video, and then I'm going to be reading Eric Hobsbawm's book on nationalism. So Eric Hobsbawm is probably my favourite historian. He's one of the 3 historians I studied for my dissertation for my final project of my degree, when I did my degree in history. And I've read everything I can find on him, and this is actually a gap in it though, so I haven't read this one. And I think there's the one on South America I haven't read yet as well, which I've pointed out a few times. But those 2 I think are the only ones I haven't read out of all the ones I've seen. He's an amazing writer, but he's also was also a communist, or at least he was a part of the Communist Party in his early years, and he's certainly a Marxist. And his approach to history is very bottom-up history and not top-down. So he would have done what Billy Bragg talks about in this book, which is to translate historical events as being driven by the people and not driven by those in power. So that's kind of like the Marxist approach, that it's the people that make the changes, and that history is full of class struggle, and you can see the origins and consistency of consent through that approach to history. So I'm going to read this as well. This is going to be a very different book to this one, I think, because this is quite a personal book. It's kind of part memoir and part history book, and this is clearly a more thorough examination of nationalism. So I'm going to read that as well. And in the third book I'm going to use to kind of complete this little trilogy of books that relate to this is a book called The Radical History of Britain, which I have in my loft, so I couldn't bring it down to use for this video. And I'm not sure when I'm going to read that, but that's going to be part of this little mini project as well. So let's talk about this for a minute. As I said, it's part memoirs, part history book. So he does talk very personally about everything, and some of the focuses he has are very localized and very much based on his life. So, for example, it's a history book, but the first chapter is all about the history of Barking, where he comes from. And then it expands it a bit more in the second chapter, and it's more about the early history of Britain and how different peoples like the Jutes and the Celts and the Saxons and the Normans all created early England and early Britain. And that chapter's fantastic. It's really good. He's done a lot of research for this. And I think I particularly like that one because I find that kind of thing fascinating. But there's a sense right at the beginning that he's trying to put across that idea, that is a very valid idea, that England as a country or as an area, as a region, has always been a mix of different ethnicities and nationalities and influences coming from different countries. And it's just been part of our past. So the sense that there is an England or there is an Englishness is already in dispute in this book. So he does talk about some other things as well. So he talks about, I'll try and do a little quick summary of what he's talking about. He talks about his ancestry and the fact that his great-grandfather comes from Wales, and he talks about some Welsh history and some of the history of descent that comes from that area as well. And he talks about his relationship to music. Obviously, he's a musician and songwriter. And he talks about his love of Simon and Garfunkel and the Everly Brothers, which is pretty cool because that's how I started loving singing and singing in harmony. So that was a nice little connection I had with him as well. And he talks quite a lot about the development of democracy in Britain and the ongoing struggle through the centuries, dating right back to the Magna Carta. He talks about the Magna Carta and what that meant. And he talks about how the Beveridge Report was a blueprint for like modern Britain and democratic Britain, and that was a long time ago. And then he goes on to talk about the Civil War, which is something I'm deeply interested in, the English Civil War, and how, very truthfully, the English Civil War and the result of it, when Charles I was put to death by the winning forces, the parliamentary forces, that changed Parliament completely. It changed the balance of power in Britain forever. You know, it never was the same again. But one of the things he explores, which is, again, a very valid point, is that the reason why that all came about was that Charles I was abusing his power, and he completely tried to reinvent the idea of ruling with consent, and then he just sort of stressed the divine right of kings rather than the idea of ruling with consent, which was something that had been established through the Magna Carta and early England and early Britain. So he was setting himself up for protest and dissent, and obviously eventually civil war with the way he was conducting his rule. When Parliament then doesn't succeed in creating a republic in Britain and the monarchy comes back, it's a very different monarchy. And I don't know if it's obvious for people that don't live in this country, but the monarchy now don't have the same, anywhere near the same active power as Parliament does, and it's very much like a figurehead kind of situation, like a representative body that would go around shaking hands with people and being like an ambassador kind of role. The democratic parliament that we have, that was established back in, essentially before the Civil War, but certainly after the Civil War, it became much more prominent as a dynamic relationship where Parliament was where decisions were made, and the monarchy was just a figurehead kind of thing. So he explores that in there as well. And he explores lots of different ways that democracy has developed. He talks about the Chartists. He talks about the different influences, different cultures coming into the country. And he talks about how those different reform acts that happened through the 19th century, the parliamentary reform acts, they helped to bring a more democratic election process to Britain, so that by the time you get to the early 1900s, then you get a much more representative election. And I find that sort of stuff really interesting and fascinating. And he's just juxtaposing all of that history stuff and all the stuff about dissent and protest and the development of sort of working class agitation. He quotes like E.P. Thompson, people like that, when he talks about the development of working class. He juxtaposes all of that with the way that in modern Britain, the St. George's flag and patriotism and English nationalism has been overtaken and claimed by the far right. And he does talk about him struggling with that, and the fact that before he started really thinking about this and looking into the history and wanting to write this book, he just saw that kind of thing as being owned by the far right. And he talks about the BNP, and he talks about Oswald Mosley as well, the British Union Fascists. He talks about all sorts of things. This came out in 2006. So he would probably talk about other things now, and then he would talk about Brexit now, because Brexit also changed all of that. And all three books I'm looking at, I don't think are new enough to tackle Brexit. So that's something maybe I could talk about in a more conclusive video. But I struggle with the idea of nationalism anyway, and patriotism. I absolutely am with Billy Bragg on being fascinated and enlightened and encouraged and impressed by the history of struggle and agitation, protest, dissent in this country. And there's a long tradition of it. For me, the first thing I got fascinated by when I first started studying history properly was the Peasants' Revolt in 1381. And he doesn't tackle that here, but it's just an amazing event where some of their demands, some of the peasants' demands in the late 14th century were really advanced and would shock people now. And it was the result of the Black Death, the fact that they had a little bit more agency because so many people died during the Black Death. But it's quite amazing that right back then you had people without power in England saying, we're not happy, these are the rules that we want to change, and this is what kind of England we want. So that goes right back to the 14th century, and since then there's been all sorts of things that have moved the country along and made it more democratic. And there is still a class issue in this country, but it's a warped class issue that he talks about at the end of the book, where he talks about how a more wealthy working class has blurred the lines a little bit, and middle class and upper class people adapting some cultural traits of the working class as well. So all that kind of stuff has blurred the lines a bit, which I think is really interesting and fascinating as well. So it's a really good book. I would recommend it, especially if you feel like you don't know a lot about English history. You can learn a lot from this one. And I think it's good to learn about the history of radical Britain, like I'll be doing in that more specific book. There might be a little bit of repetition between this book and that third book, but I haven't read that yet, so we'll find out. Just to conclude on this book, I don't think you need to worry about whether or not what side of the fence you sit on politically to read this book, because it is mostly a history book, really. So you will learn a lot about England and Britain and the way that the politics of Britain has changed over the years. And I think you will learn a lot. I think it's a very good, informative and well-informed book. for me personally, it hasn't really persuaded me that that's the kind of patriotism or kind of nationalism I can sit well with, because it still feels weird to be proud of something that happened 700 years ago that had nothing to do with me, or to link myself to a country's history that, again, has got nothing to do with me. So I like being English, I like being British, I like being European, but I think I have to say it like that. I don't think I can say I'm proud to be English, I'm proud to be British, because it's an absolute accident of birth where you're born. And I think there's a lot of great things about this country and about our culture, but most of that comes down to our general attitude to multiculturalism and our attitude to freedom of religion, freedom of thought, freedom of press, all those different things that I think are really important for a good, healthy, democratic society. So that's the sort of stuff that I am that give me reasons to be pleased to be English. But again, I'm not proud to be English, because I think pride takes it somewhere else. Then you start claiming ownership of something that's not yours, I think. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was brilliant, and I love the historical aspects of this book, but it hasn't convinced me that I can link my fascination and awe of the historical characters that have developed left-wing agitation in this country to any kind of pride. So that's not really happened. But I'm still fascinated by the subject, and I'm still very ambivalent / cynical about patriotism. But yeah, definitely recommend this book. And if you want to learn more about English history and British history, it's a good thing to add to your TBR. So there we are. Thanks for watching. The Progressive Patriot. I'm going to be reading this one next, Eric Hobsbawm's Examination of Nationalism, and this is going to be an international thing. So thanks for watching, everybody. Please comment below on your thoughts on all that. Stay curious.
Paint me a picture